Hey guys, Sean here and welcome to the F1 Word. Now last time out in Spa, Ferrari suffered their worst race result in which both cars finished with no penalties being applied in more than a decade after finishing 13th and 14th, and at no point during the Belgian Grand Prix weekend did they look anywhere near threatening to do any better. It was quite the fall from grace for the Scuderia, having secured a front row lockout at the same track 12 months ago, going on to win the race courtesy of Charles Leclerc of course. So quite frankly, what the hell is going on, and have Ferrari just about hit rock bottom? Well, the go-to answer is obviously the power unit in terms of what's going on. Last year the Ferrari engine was incredible in a straight line and one of the major factors in why they performed so well at most of the power tracks on the calendar. Fast forward a year and Sebastian Vettel, according to data seen by the race, which you can find linked down below by the way, was more than 1.5 seconds slower on the straights around Spa. That's a second and a half. Unbelievable. In fact, overall, the Ferrari Sector 1 and 2 times were almost a full second slower, so come qualifying on Saturday, that translated to a lap time by Charles Leclerc that was just shy of half a second slower than in 2019. And although Vettel's qualifying time did flatter because it was almost identical to last year, that is more down to the fact he didn't exactly deliver the perfect sectors 12 months ago. Now, I think we all kind of know why the car is so down on power in 2020. So towards the end of last year, the FIA introduced a new technical directive that covered fuel flow, as well as some other areas that teams could potentially exploit to improve their power unit performance. They were also investigated further over the winter, eventually reaching a confidential agreement with the FIA to try to bring to an end the controversy, at least from their point of view. For the sake of balance, it should be stressed that officially they have never been found guilty of breaching any regulations. However, it doesn't exactly take a genius to work out that something wasn't quite right last season. Especially when you look at where they are 12 months later. At the very least, they exploited a very controversial loophole. But as touched on during the Belgian Grand Prix race reaction stream, this sudden plummet into the back end of the midfield by Ferrari can't just be all about power. I'm absolutely adamant on that. Sure, post-race weekend data has shown that the car was almost 8 miles an hour slower down the Long Kemmel Straight, but the car is definitely suffering in other areas too. If you look at the onboards of Vettel and Leclerc, particularly during practice, the amount of times they were all crossed up trying to get round corners, that car is not easy to handle. It is widely believed that the SF1000 is a more draggy car than its predecessor, and that was made worse at Spa as the team had to try to make up for their handling issues by slapping more wing on than perhaps they would have liked to, in order to be somewhat competitive in that twisty middle sector, thus compromising their speed in the first and final sectors. In trying to strike this right balance between good straight line speed and a stable car through the corners, compromises had to be made. The problem for Ferrari, though, is that with an engine so down on power, finding that compromise is difficult, and they're having to make more sacrifices than perhaps they'd like to. And over the course of the weekend, Binotto said the team was, quote, severely lacking in both aerodynamic efficiency and power over the weekend. It was also evident and later admitted to by the team that on top of everything else, they were also struggling to get the tyres working in the right window around Spa. So, down on power, a draggy car, sacrifices to set up and issues with the tyres, it all came to form, I suppose you could call it the perfect storm. Despite the dismal weekend though, Binotto is denying the team is in any sort of crisis, preferring to state that they are in fact in the middle of a storm. But is it a crisis, or as Binotto said over the weekend, is it just track specific, a one-off if you like? Well, I think it's fair to say that their performance in Belgium was far worse than many would have predicted. And as already mentioned, everything seemed to be working against them, but make no mistake, it's not like they've been setting the world alight at other tracks either. They've not been brilliant. In Spain, they looked well off the pace again, although they were at least able to fight for points and looked somewhat competitive in the midfield. And they did also struggle in Hungary, although again they were at least able to grab some points. But just grabbing points isn't where Ferrari expect to be. It's not been good enough from them at all so far this year. The one shining light for them to this point now in 2020 has absolutely been Charles Leclerc. His podiums at the Austrian and British Grand Prix were surprises, and although fortunate, they rewarded his efforts in extracting the maximum from the car and putting himself in a position to capitalise on any luck when it fell his way. Yes, I'm banging that drum again. He also impressed at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, finishing in 4th place. So he has been driving the wheels off that car and doing a pretty decent job, all things considered. His teammate, however, has really been struggling with a best finish so far of just 6th place. Back to that word though, crisis. Obviously it would be a PR nightmare for Binotto to come out and use that word in the media. He'd be absolutely torn apart for it. But surely if it isn't quite a crisis just yet, Ferrari are almost on the brink of one. I've got to say this though, we've been here before. In both 2009 and 2014, Ferrari really struggled, having failed to take advantage of the major rule changes in the same way that some of their rivals did, eventually going on to finish 4th in the Constructors' Championship for both of those seasons. But at least in 2009 they won a race, funnily enough the Belgian Grand Prix, but they look a hell of a long way off that right now. They also had a pretty poor car in 2005, actually I'd say diabolical compared to their dominant 2004 car, but again they won a race thanks to Michelin and still finished top 3 in the standings. I tell you what this all reminds me of, this struggle from Ferrari. It reminds me of the pre-Schumacher, Todd Braun and Byrne days. As some of you will know, I started watching F1 back in 1992, and although they were still a top 4 team and picked up the odd win here and there, and by the odd win I mean 2 between 1992 and the end of the 1995 season, I never really considered them title contenders. In fact, until I really started to get interested in the history of Formula 1 as I grew up, I didn't really realise just how successful they had once been. If I were comparing how I saw them back then to a team now, you'd be looking at Renault or perhaps McLaren from the last few years, a best of the rest contender. It wasn't until that dream team came together in 1996 that things began to change, because prior to Schumacher's title triumph in 2000, Ferrari hadn't won the Drivers' Championship since Jody Scheckter took the crown in 1979. That's a 21-year wait. And their Constructors' Championship title in 1999 was the team's first since 1983. Like I say, we've been here before. But has this got the potential to see the team sink lower than it ever has before, maybe even hit rock bottom, as I said earlier? Based on Spa alone and looking at some of the tracks still to come, including the likes of Monza, Sochi and Bahrain, all of which have some pretty long straights and high-speed corners, you might argue that it could well be the case, especially when you consider that the Scuderia haven't finished lower than 4th in the championship since 1981, and right now they sit 5th on 61 points and are just 2 clear of Renault. However, since the Constructors' Championship was first introduced in 1958, Ferrari's lowest finish was actually 10th, something they achieved in 1980, and that was 1 year on from winning the title in 1979. If you want to talk about a fall from grace, that was a fall from grace. And it must be said as well that whilst it may look bad if you just have a quick glance at the current standings, they are only 7 points behind McLaren in 3rd, and with 10 races still to go, there is still plenty of time to turn that around. So, quite frankly, no, when you just look at the stats, they are not rock bottom, nowhere near it in fact. But they are definitely a long way off where a team like that should be. And by the way, I get that being a top 3 team is not a God-given right and that just being Ferrari isn't enough in Formula 1. I totally understand that. My point is, though, that for a team who are handed more cash by F1 at the end of every season than any other team, including Mercedes, and given just how much they spend, they should be right towards the sharp end of the grid and giving Mercedes a run for their money season in and season out. But they're not, and in all honesty, building 2 title contending cars since 2014, let's say 2017 and 2018, is not good enough again, given just how much they spend and how much they get handed out to them. What are they doing with all that money? Anyway, aside from the power deficit and the aero issues, what else do I think has contributed to the team's struggle? Well, firstly, promoting Binotto the way they did was a mistake. Now, hear me out on this one. I don't actually think he was a bad choice for the team principal role. I really don't. He has been at that team since 1995 and knows it inside out, so promoting someone from within who understands the team and Ferrari's philosophy makes total sense. What makes no sense, though, is promoting him whilst keeping him in the role of technical director. Of course, they need someone to do that job, but how could Binotto be expected to juggle the responsibilities of leading an entire team the size of Ferrari and maintain the job he was doing in the technical department? By doing that, they left him stretched, and for me at least, there was no way he could effectively manage. Something had to give. It's easy to say this with hindsight, obviously, but they should have brought in a technical director or again promoted from within and left Binotto to crack on with the job of actually managing. And for the record, he held that role until the team's very recent reshuffle. It seems crazy to me. You are never going to see Toto Wolff nip off to work on the Mercedes engine for a couple of days or see Andreas Seidel disappear to design a new front wing. Partly because that's maybe not something they know anything about, but you get the point I'm making. Binotto is there as team principal to manage the team, not do all the work as well, or some extra work on top of that. He's got to be able to focus on getting that team managed properly. It's easy to blame Binotto for the team's shortcomings, and yes, absolutely. In most businesses, the buck starts and ends with the manager, but you've also got to give that manager every chance to succeed. And spreading him thinly across multiple roles does not do that. And that's another thing. How many team principals are Ferrari going to go through before they perhaps look at what's going on elsewhere? Maybe higher up the hierarchy. Since Jean Todt left the team in 2007, they've gone through 4 different team bosses. So that's Stefano Domenicali, Marco Mattiacci, Maurizio Arrivabene, and now Mattia Binotto. And have we really seen a huge change in fortunes with each of those new bosses? Maybe an upturn in form, but no major revolution. So yeah, fine, sack him if that's the easy solution or feels like the easy solution, but the team haven't won any titles since 2008, so the problems were there long before Binotto got his hands on that role. And this is something which is really bugging me about Ferrari. They've been in Formula 1 since 1950 and they aren't even getting the basics right. This isn't a new team, this is Ferrari. This season we have heard both Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc dictating or trying to dictate strategy over team radio. Why are the drivers doing that? Sure, they can relay information to the team regarding the handling of the car or how the tyres are coping, but where are these Ferrari strategists? Why in Belgium did they not pit Vettel when he was clearly struggling? I get that they were concerned about losing places, but he was 13th, so what? Yeah, a 13th place finish could make a difference to a backmarker season, but for a team like Ferrari who have 61 points on the board, there is stuff all difference between finishing 13th and finishing 20th. It's still no points. In that situation, it's got to be worth a gamble. You've got a 4-time world champion, massively experienced driver telling you his tyres are screwed, and he's just going to keep getting gobbled up by the pack. Get him in the pits and give him a chance to fight. He might still end up 13th, but at least they tried something. And I can just sense you typing it in the comments, so I'll say it right now. I know this is nothing new. Bad calls on strategy cost them a title in 2010. I firmly believe that. And we've seen plenty of times over the last few years that bad strategy has cost them big time in races as well. But that doesn't ever seem to get addressed, or at least from the outside looking in, it doesn't feel like it gets addressed. So my point is, sacking Binotto is all well and good, but if whoever comes in doesn't address that along with everything else, they'll be sacking them in 18 months as well. And then throw into that mix the fact you've got a driver who is on his way out and appears to be being left out in the cold by the team, and you've got this recipe for disaster. Actually, that brings me on very nicely to my next point. Look at Mercedes. Every single member of that team, from Toto Wolff to Valtteri Bottas, from James Allison to Lewis Hamilton, they are all pulling in the same direction. They are a strong, competent and coherent team. What has that translated into? 6, soon to be 7 straight drivers and constructors titles. Yes, they took advantage of a rules change in 2014 to get this dominance, but the rules were exactly the same for Ferrari, for Red Bull, for every other team. Bringing it back to 2020 though, Ferrari spent the entire winter telling the world that Vettel was their number one choice for 2021, that they wanted to extend his deal, and there were absolutely no obstacles in the way. Fast forward a matter of weeks and they don't even put an offer on the table and announce that they won't be extending his contract. And I'll answer this one as well because it might crop up. No, I absolutely do not believe their excuse that it was all about COVID. Sure, they're going to take a financial hit this year, as every team will, but that just felt to me like the perfect excuse. They might be telling the truth, but I don't totally believe it. So before the season even starts, you've got a frustrated driver, a professional one, no doubt about that in my mind whatsoever, but frustrated nevertheless. That's bad enough, but then treating him the way they have been, that's just going to make matters even worse. They've been, quite literally at times, ignoring each other over team radio. There've been frosty exchanges when they do talk. There's been arguing over strategy and a lack of communication, and neither party has been especially complimentary in the press to each other either. It's an absolute mess. This isn't just about the car underperforming on track. This is about the whole team just not working. I suppose the question then is, what now and what have they got to do? Well, in the short term, and sorry Ferrari fans, I wouldn't expect much to change this coming weekend in Monza. I mean, for starters, there's just no time between races to get much work done in improving the car anyway. All they can do really is sit down and analyse what went wrong in Spa and try to rectify what they can during practice ready for quali in the race. Perhaps even do some extra running across the 3 practice sessions, but don't forget, Monza is also a power track and it's likely, in fact it's probable, that most of their rivals will trim off even more downforce, meaning that given they have to find that compromise I mentioned earlier, Ferrari could actually end up even worse off. Yes, it could be even worse than Spa. Long term, Ferrari's focus needs to be on 2022. I don't think that'll come as any surprise to anybody. I don't expect to see them totally write off next season, but John Elkann has already said that he doesn't expect to see them fighting for regular wins until the rules change. So whilst they do need to improve for 2021, which let's not forget will be difficult given the limitations around what all the teams can do in terms of development over the next year or so, the focus has got to be predominantly on 2022. What I will add at this point as well is that there is no substitute for power. Therefore, if I were in charge at Maranello, I'd be trying everything to sign Andy Cowell. It should be said that it has been reported in Italy that Cowell has already turned down an offer to join a Scuderia, and that's an offer which allegedly came during their recent reshuffle, but he is available, and I will go all out to get him. Just because he's rejected one offer doesn't mean he'll reject the next one or the one after that. Honestly, I really do think he will be such a boost and a great addition to the team. He's kind of just what they need right now. To wrap things up then, no is the answer to my own question. I don't think Ferrari have hit rock bottom just yet, and perhaps there is some truth in what Binotto is saying about their form being a bit track specific last time out. But although not rock bottom, they certainly appear to be in decline and need to act quickly to turn it around. It won't be easy because of those restrictions that are in place over the next 18 months when it comes to the changes that can be made to the chassis and the engine, but there is a massive rules reset on the horizon, and Ferrari need to take a leaf out of Mercedes' book from the 2014 regulation change and try to use that as a springboard back to the front. It is their best opportunity now, and if they get that wrong, it could be a long old wait for more success. That is it for this video then, but you can let me know your thoughts down in the comment section about Ferrari's 2020 season, and I will be back across the Italian Grand Prix weekend with more content as always. In the meantime though, don't forget that you can of course follow me over on social media, and all of the links you need for that are in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching, and hopefully I will catch you again in the next one. Bye bye.